you, Father in heaven. Thank you, Lord, for your prophetic word. I pray as we study together this afternoon, we will have clarity on what is truth and be able to divide truth from error. I pray, Father, for unity on these points, and that you will continue to pour light upon your people, that we might know what period of Earth's history we're living in and what is required of us. I pray, Lord, for that preparation. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. So I'm sorry if this morning was a little bit chaotic. What we're trying to do is bring together things that have already been established and laid out in presentations, and pretty much just overlay them, bring them together. I'm particularly trying to hone this in on a particular date, a particular point, as we will see. So what I want to do to introduce today's study is just bring out 4 waymarks. We began the study into these things with Pyrrhus, and those 4 dates that we looked at: 303 BC. There was an alliance between the king of the north and the king of the south. This relationship was designed to aid the king of the north in a particular battle. That was 301 BC, the Battle of Ipsus. This alliance was strained. Later on, I'm going to change those 2 lines of Pyrrhus. If we understand this as the Battle of Ipsus, we're going to his next history to understand the Battle of Heraclea. We can do this on both lines of Pyrrhus, his alpha and his omega history, but I'm just going to, for ease, I'm just going to pull out the names of the battles. So Ipsus, first the alliance, and then Ipsus, then the Battle of Heraclea, and then the Battle of Asculum. This is the history that we then overlaid over World War II. We understood that Pyrrhus is a type of Stalin. And we brought this into the history of World War II and identified this was August of 1939. And again, this was an alliance between Stalin and Hitler, between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union, designed to enable Hitler to enter into a war which was September of 1939, where you have these 3 allies known as the Allied forces face off against this alliance of North, the King of the North, plus the King of the South. Then their relationship goes sour. It's strained, and that was in the month of August of 1940. That breakdown in their relationship, though, is healed. For a brief period of time, until it's completely severed, the alliance is completely broken in 1941 when Hitler invades the Soviet Union. And this is the alliance broken. As we looked at this morning, we're looking at the phases of a relationship between the King of the North and the King of the South. Not just pulling out battles, but trying to see the periods in between the battles and what is happening in that time period. World War II really gives us a lot of light on what this looks like. We also considered the fact that all of these battles have the same characteristics. The Battle of Ipsus was won by elephants. Those elephants that Seleucus brought back from the east decided the Battle of Ipsus. Heraclea was the first time that the Roman army saw elephants, and those elephants won the battle for Pyrrhus. Again, the Battle of Asculum Pyrrhus's elephants won the day. And we could go, there's one more battle over here, the Battle of Beneventum. And Pyrrhus lost that battle because of his own elephants that turned and charged over their own troops. So each battle, and we can mark 4, is decided by elephants. So we know that these battles carry the same characteristics all the way through. So what we have been trying to in this movement understand is primarily this date here. Because what we've been focusing on since the beginning for many years is Daniel 11 verse 40, which shows us a dynamic, a war between the king of the north and the king of the south. And we understand that that war really begins at this date here, with the Battle of Asculum, what we generally call Raphia, from Daniel chapter 11. But that this war begins here. When we overlay the history of World War II, we see that it occurs in 2 parts. That this, really beginning here, this first battle, Battle of Ipsus, is beginning war on the Western Front. Hitler faced a war on 2 fronts. First of all, there is war on the West. The Western Front of World War II. And that is progressive. Until Operation Barbarossa, you have war on the Eastern Front. So before you see a war between the king of the north and the king of the south, you actually see the king of the north fight against his own country and against his own allies. This is the date we've been trying to understand, the Battle of Raphia, because we understand that has implications for close of probation for us as priests. But what Pyrrhus opens up is the history prior to that. If we want to understand what the Battle of Asculum looks like, where do we need to go? We need to understand the Battle of Ipsus and the Battle of Heraclea. They have the same mode of warfare, and they identify what that battle looks like in our time. Heraclea, therefore, is key to understanding Asculum. We can learn that through Ipsus, but it's particularly Heraclea that gives us more information. And when we made application and we overlaid these histories, we understood the alliance occurred around 2014. I will write it higher. And that first battle against the threefold enemy, what did Trump and Putin unite to do? War on the Western Front, 2016 and Donald Trump's election, which gives us our first clue to what this battle looks like. What does August 1940 line up with? 2018. And the alliance broken. This is where we are looking ahead to identify 2019 and the Battle of Raphia. 2 Corinthians 13 teaches us, this is the 3rd time I am coming to you, in the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses shall every word be established. So if we want to know what Raphia looks like, we have to understand the dynamics of 2016 and 2018. In the history of World War II, what happened in August of 1940 was that this alliance between Hitler and Stalin was severely strained, so much so that they cut off their diplomatic relationship for the whole month of August. Reading to you about that month, in August, the Soviet Union briefly suspended its deliveries after their relations were strained following disagreement over policy in the Balkans, the Soviet Union's war with Finland, Germany falling behind in its deliveries of goods under the pact, and with Stalin worried that Hitler's war with the West might end quickly after France signed an armistice. By the end of August, relations improved again as the countries had redrawn the Hungarian and Romanian borders and settled Bulgarian claims, and they'd also settled this financial disagreement. This pact signed in August of 1939 had three parts. This is the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. The first part is a non-aggression clause. This is what Hitler particularly needed. He was not strong enough to fight a two-front war at the very beginning. So what he needed was a promise from Stalin that the Soviet Union would not go to war with Germany until Germany had first taken on the West. So he needed time. This non-aggression pact gave him time. Without this, he would never have invaded Poland. He would have identified it as suicide. The second part of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact was the secret part, and it defined spheres of influence. They redrew the map of Europe and divvied out what belongs to you, what belongs to me. Those spheres of influence. The third aspect, not directly in this pact, but one they signed shortly afterward, was to do with trade, the financial element. Without trade from the Soviet Union, Hitler would never have been able to engage in war. Germany was not self-sufficient enough to be able to sustain a war, particularly after Britain started sealing off his still open trade routes. So after the invasion of Poland here, their relationship becomes increasingly strained until you see this breakdown in August of 1940, or the first battle if you consider Pyrrhus. This is the waymark that lines up with our loud cry. Our loud cry for the priests began sometime. I'm not going to be dogmatic about dates. We do have a date, but if we keep it a period of time, it began sometime late September and will end by the end of 2018. So we are in the period, have been in the period of the loud cry for the priests. What I want to do today is look at application of August 1940 and the Battle of Heraclea as it coincides with our loud cry. This is the story of Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. And we need to understand what had been happening between 2016 and 2018. The breakdown of this alliance. Just considering the Battle of Heraclea. Before the promised troops of his allies had come to him, Pyrrhus learned that a powerful army of the Romans was marching against him. Pyrrhus sent a herald to ask the Romans whether they would accept him as an arbiter between them and the Greeks in Italy. They replied, "The Romans neither take Pyrrhus as an arbiter nor fear him as an enemy." A battle was fought 280 BC near Heraclea in Italy, in which the Romans were defeated with a loss of 15,000 men. This is from A.T. Jones' Great Empires of Bible History. So one aspect that we need to mark if we're going to line up this Battle of Heraclea as A.T. Jones describes it is provoked by the north. It's provoked by the king of the north. He's the one that strains that relationship, but it's won by the king of the south. We've already identified the mode of warfare. It's cyber, it's an information war. We particularly see that when we line up 2016. We also see that when we line up 1989 and see how the Soviet Union was undermined and then destroyed from the inside in an information war. If we understand the Cold War in 1989, it helps us understand 2016. So we've already done studies on what that looked like. We understand that the internet was developed around 1969. The World Wide Web was invented in 1989, released in 1991. Right at our time of the end, the World Wide Web comes into being. And ever since then, before then, but particularly since 1989, we identify ourselves as being in the information age. If you went back thousands of years, you thought back of the Iron Age or the Stone Age. back then you fought battles based on what age you're in. If you're in the Iron Age, you fought battles with iron. If you're in the Stone Age, you had stone-tipped spears. Those things defined what type of war you were fighting. We're now in the information age, and it has been an information war. What I want to do is track what has happened in this period here from 2016 to where we are now at the end of 2018 and the relationship between Donald Trump and Putin. It came out only about a week ago that after Donald Trump won the election in 2016, that how Vladimir Putin was manipulating the internet, that information war he was waging against the United States actually doubled after Donald Trump won the election. So nothing ends here, it actually escalates. May 11 of 2017, Donald Trump signed a new executive order. This is Executive Order 13800, strengthening the cybersecurity of federal networks and critical infrastructure. I'm going to take this off and start just listing a few dates for us. So Donald Trump, despite what he tweets, well knows that he won that election, if not because of Russian interference, I would suggest at least partly due to Russian interference. And he knows how that interference occurred. He knows that what Putin was doing, putting things out onto the internet, manipulating the internet with these messages. There was a presentation done in Arkansas titled, I think it's called Information War, that lays more of those things out. But Donald Trump knows how that came about, that won him the 2016 election. So if he's to secure his own country, he then has to also stop Putin being able to turn that against him. What Putin used to aid him in 2016, Trump has to make sure that Putin cannot use then to harm him. May 11 of 2017, there's a new executive order. This is Order 13800, called Strengthening the Cybersecurity of Federal Networks and Critical Infrastructure. That executive order is going to come up again shortly. I want to skip down now to July of 2018. How is their relationship in July of 2018? Solid. This is when Trump and Putin met at a summit in Helsinki. Prior to meeting with Putin, Donald Trump tore strips off NATO and his other allies. This is where he laid into their allies, particularly NATO. I'm going to read to you a few different quotes. I won't give the references for time, but just descriptions of what happened. A growing number of Republican lawmakers focused on Trump's remarks that both the US and Russia were to blame for the troubled relations between the two countries. Trump responded to a question about whether Russia had any responsibility for that relationship, indicated that the ongoing investigation into the 2016 election was as much to blame as the Russian interference itself. Senator John McCain described the meeting in Helsinki as a tragic mistake. John McCain said, "No prior president has ever abased himself more abjectly before a tyrant." The world watched that meeting and wondered what was going on. Even those that didn't understand the collusion wondered what was going on, that Trump would abase himself to that level. He tore strips off his allies. He said that the United States was as much to blame as Russia. He split from his own intelligence services and said that Russia never interfered in the election. And then he said the idea of giving Vladimir Putin a meeting with Bill Browder was a great idea, that Putin was very generous in making that offer. So if you've watched those programs that were sent out on Bill Browder and how Bill Browder comes into it, that shows that is a significant step. So in July of 2018, this alliance, it's in a, I would suggest, still strong. but Donald Trump is working. September of 2018. September 21, 2018. Donald Trump unveils the National Cyber Strategy. This is known as the National Cyber Strategy. It rewrote the rulebook of how the United States engages in cyber war. I'm going to read to you a little bit from the forward written by Trump himself. He says, in the last 18 months, my administration has taken action to address cyber threats. So in 2017, they signed more cyber legislation, more than double the amount of cyber legislation in 2017 than that which had been signed in 2016 under Obama. He says, we have sanctioned malign cyber actors. We have indicted those who committed cyber crimes. We have publicly attributed malicious activity to the adversaries responsible and released details about the tools they employed. We have required departments and agencies to remove software vulnerable to virus security risks. And he goes on. He says, in addition, last year I signed Executive Order 13800, that was on May 11. He said that laid the groundwork for this national cyber security strategy. So it's an executive order that was the groundwork to bring in a new national cyber strategy. He says, this strategy explains how my administration will defend the homeland by protecting networks, systems, functions and data, promote American prosperity by nurturing a secure, thriving digital economy and fostering strong domestic innovation. 3, preserve peace and security by strengthening the ability of the United States, in concert with allies and partners, to deter and, if necessary, punish those who use cyber tools for malicious purposes. And 4, expand American influence abroad to extend the key tenets of an open, interoperable, reliable and secure Internet. He says the rise of the Internet and the growing centrality of cyberspace to all facets of the modern world corresponded with the rise of the United States as the world's lone superpower. When did the United States rise as the world's lone superpower? 1989 to 1991. Before that, there was 2. And Donald Trump is identifying that the rise of the Internet, 1989 to 1991, corresponded with the rise of the United States as the world's only superpower. For the past quarter century, 25 years, the ingenuity of the American people drove the evolution of cyberspace. I'm skipping much of it. He goes on to say, note this, he names 4 actors: Russia, China, Iran and North Korea all use cyberspace as a means to challenge the United States, its allies and partners, often with a recklessness they would never consider in any other domain. I would switch domain for mode of warfare. These adversaries use cyber tools to undermine our economy and democracy, steal our intellectual property, and sow discord in our democratic processes. What did Donald Trump just admit to? 2016. We are vulnerable to peacetime cyber attacks against critical infrastructure, and the risk is growing that these countries will conduct cyber attacks against the United States during a crisis short of war. These adversaries are continually developing new and more effective cyber weapons. The National Cyber Strategy outlines how we will: 1. Defend the homeland by protecting networks, systems, functions and data. 2. Promote American prosperity by nurturing a secure, thriving digital economy. 3. Preserve peace and security by strengthening the United States' ability in concert with allies and partners to deter. And 4. Expand American influence abroad. The US Department of Defense website announced that day the first new national cyber strategy in 15 years. The United States had not had an updated cyber strategy since 2003. The official White House page said it was the first fully articulated cyber strategy for the United States since 2003. What they would do was gain access to computer systems of potential targets, particularly foreign countries, before any order has been given to attack them, or even between a foreign attack has occurred. So if you think another country is going to attack you, you can preempt that and get in there first. One of the US officials used this analogy. Spy agencies, the official said, sometimes try to place an agent in a service position at a facility run by an adversary. So let's say your enemy has a warehouse, you try and place a spy in that building. That agent's assignment is to learn the access codes, map that facility, conduct wide surveillance of its operations, copy sets of keys, unlock doors. All of that. That information and access would allow the intelligence agency, in theory, to sneak a bomb into the facility when it wants to. What the military is now authorized to do is after an agreement has been reached that there is a threat, is that in the online world, you can preempt a strike, go in and map the cyber systems of your enemy. This comes under the National Security Strategy in a classified part, NSPM 13. That is still classified. During a press conference on September 20 to roll out the new cyber strategy, Bolton said that, quote, for any nation that's taking cyber activity against the United States, they should expect, and this is part of creating structures of deterrence so that it's publicly known that we will respond offensively as well as defensively. So what is John Bolton saying? That he's saying this on purpose so that it's publicly known that the United States now has systems in place to not just act on the defensive, as they had only been able to do since 2003, but now that they can also act on the offensive. According to sources, this is designed around the idea of concepts of operations, and the main point of this is to plan to act against Russia if Russia attempts to interfere again with the United States. And who was the first power that Donald Trump named? Russia. Asked about protection against Russian election meddling during the rollout of the new cyber strategy, Bolton pointed to the new executive order as helping unleash the US capability. So John Bolton, when asked about the Russian election meddling in the midterms, he said that this national cyber strategy was put in place to help unlock US capability. So now that they're able to respond if Russia attempts to meddle again. October 28, I'd like to note now that we are well into the time period of our loud cry. We're spanning that period. October 28, Vladimir Putin and John Bolton met in Moscow. Putin, addressing Bolton in front of the media, referred to this July meeting as constructive. I watched this on video and I've just taken a couple of notes of what Putin said, and I just want to take two sentences. Well, first of all, he said that July meeting went so well, and then he says, quote, that is why I'm quite surprised to see steps undertaken by the United States that are not substantiated by anything, and I don't think they can be called friendly. We have basically not responded to your steps, but still it goes on and on. So what is Putin identifying in October 28 of 2018? That there are, as he is saying, steps being taken by the United States that he can't call friendly, and he doesn't understand why. This is the antagonism of the King of the North. And their relationship begins to sour. October 31, just a few days later, John Bolton is speaking in an interview, and he said, remember what we said under the National Cyber Strategy, that they can preempt a strike and go in and map the computer networks of a foreign country. John Bolton said on October 31 that the US was, quote, right now undertaking offensive cyber operations to safeguard the election. So what he's saying on October 31 is that they're already on the offensive against Russia. Whatever that would mean would be classified. November 6 was the midterm elections. November 9 to 11 was the meetings in France that coincided with the armistice of World War I, where all the world leaders, or the major world leaders, met together. On the sidelines of this meeting, in honour of that armistice, Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin were to meet. Trump cancelled those meetings. He refused to meet with Vladimir Putin. November 16, Donald Trump creates a new agency within the NSA. He creates the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency within the Department of Homeland Security. So now they have a cybersecurity agency. November 25. November 25, Russia accused Ukrainian ships of illegally entering Russian water. Russia fired on and seized 3 Ukrainian naval vessels off the Crimean Peninsula in a major escalation of tension between the two countries. Russia seized 2 gunboats and a tug. A number of Ukrainian crew members were injured. Each country blames the other for the incident. On Monday, Ukrainian MPs are due to vote on declaring martial law, such is their fear that this was about to spiral out of control with Russia. So if you mark November 25, Ukraine. November 29. Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin were heading to the G20 summit and they were due to meet. Donald Trump abruptly cancelled his meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin 2 days before they were scheduled to sit down on the sidelines of the G20 summit. Trump, in an interview, said that there was never a better time to meet with Putin, said the meeting was going ahead. Approximately 1 hour later, he was on board Air Force One and he tweeted out that the meeting was cancelled. The Russian delegation found out that the meeting was cancelled via Twitter. The reason that Donald Trump said he was cancelling his meeting with Putin was because of this incident with Ukraine. Trump says, based on the fact that the ships and sailors have not been returned to Ukraine from Russia, I have decided it would be best for all parties concerned to cancel my previously scheduled meeting in Argentina with President Putin. I look forward to a meaningful summit again as soon as this situation is resolved, Trump tweeted on the way to the summit. Trump's cancellation marked a dramatic change in tone. In the past, he has repeatedly stressed his desire for a warm relationship with Putin. When the two leaders met in Helsinki in July, Trump refused to criticise Putin and drew fire at home. His announcement appeared to catch Moscow by surprise, with Russian officials getting their first news of it from the media. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov told RIA news agency that the Kremlin regretted Trump's decision and said Russia is ready for contact with him. So it took them by surprise. And you can't also ignore during this time the pressure that Trump is under because of the Russia investigation. If we also consider the year that Trump has had, to understand this history, last time we talked, we mentioned some names that should be understood. Paul Manafort, Michael Cohen, Michael Flynn, particularly Bill Browder. And we still have those, we have some documentaries on those things that can quickly catch us up to speed on those names. But what has been happening since the 2016 election is also the war on the Western Front, and this does come into play. This is also the pressure that's on Trump. So we can't cover that history in an hour, not in the couple of minutes I want to, but I'm just going to mention a couple of things that have happened. This is an article from the New York Times discussing Trump's impeachment. They say whether or not there's already enough evidence to impeach Mr. Trump, we will learn what the special counsel and Robert Mueller has found, even if his investigation is cut short. During those midterm elections, a significant number of Republican candidates no longer wanted to run with Donald Trump. It showed his political status as weak, that has been weak for some time, was hurtling downhill. The midterms were followed by new revelations in criminal investigations of once close advisors, as well as new scandals involving Trump himself. The odour of personal corruption on the president's part, perhaps affecting his foreign policy, grew stronger. Then the events of the past several days, which we're about to discuss. Republicans who are at once Mr. Trump's firm allies have already openly criticised some of his recent actions. It always seemed that Mr. Trump's turbulent presidency was unsustainable and that key Republicans would eventually decide that he had become too great a burden to the party or too great a danger to the country. That time may have arrived right now. In the end, the Republicans will opt for their own political survival. Almost from the outset, some Senate Republicans have speculated on how long his presidency would even last. Some surely noticed that his base did not prevail in the midterm elections. We won't go through all that has come down on him at that time, the proof of the Russian building project within the time frame where he was running for president. I just want to quickly discuss Michael Cohen's sentencing that was December 12. Because this was perhaps one of the biggest hits that Donald Trump took. This was his personal lawyer being sentenced. And in that sentence, someone speaking on the part of Mueller's investigation said some interesting things. Jeanine Rhee, who was part of Mueller's prosecution team, told the judge in Cohen's sentencing that Cohen has endeavoured to account for his criminal conduct in numerous ways by providing, quote, credible and reliable information about core Russia-related issues under investigation. So what has Cohen provided Mueller with? Credible and reliable information tying together Trump and Russia. Rhee said she could not go into detail about the Russia investigation as it is ongoing, but that Cohen was helpful to the probe. Cohen, she said, was careful to note what he knows and what he doesn't know. Mr. Cohen has sought to tell us the truth, and that is of utmost value to us. They credited Cohen with providing useful information about the ongoing probe into the 2016 election, as well as providing, quote, relevant information about his contacts with people connected to the White House between 2017 and 2018. So we can see that by now this relationship has been souring through this history, and what really has hit this alliance? If we think of those three parts, first the non-aggression clause, that doesn't end till here. The non-aggression part isn't the problem. Over this waymark, the two that are under attack is the financial element and the spheres of influence. What did Donald Trump promise Vladimir Putin? Bill Browder. That was what came out of that July summit. Some of you, those that aren't acquainted with Bill Browder, I would suggest if you could look into him. What Bill Browder brought was sanctions against Russia. This comes down to sanctions. So what Putin was working for over that election period was to have sanctions removed, this financial element. Those sanctions tie up his own personal wealth, estimated by Bill Browder to be $500 billion in Western markets. So you have sanctions, the financial element, that third part of the pact we noted, and the second part we noted was spheres of influence. Where are those spheres of influence divided between Putin and Trump? Where's the tension over those spheres of influence? Ukraine, Syria, and Afghanistan. Which brings us to December 19. On December 19, about 10 days ago, Trump ordered the full withdrawal of American troops from Syria, taking his own White House staff by complete surprise. Just before Mr. Trump pronounced them defeated, ISIS took out an attack in Raqqa. It is believed that the fugitive leader of the ISIS Caliphate, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, is still at large and is believed to be hiding in a remote area near the Iraq-Syria border. The UN warned in August that the group may still have up to 30,000 fighters in Iraq and Syria. Is ISIS defeated? 30,000 troops and the head is still alive. ISIS is not defeated. But Trump has ordered a full withdrawal of American troops from Syria. That same day, December 19, Trump ordered the withdrawal of half of US troops stationed in Afghanistan. So if we consider part 2, spheres of influence, what has Trump just given to Putin? Syria and Afghanistan. President Trump made the decision to pull the troops out of Afghanistan. At the same time, he decided to pull American forces out of Syria. The announcement came hours after Jim Mattis, the Secretary of Defense, said that he would resign from his position at the end of February after disagreeing with the president over these troop withdrawals. Donald Trump, not liking to lose, promptly fired the man who'd already resigned, and Jim Mattis will now not return in the new year. He ends 2 months early. On the same day, December 19, the White House announced that they were lifting sanctions on a Russian oligarch known as Oleg Deripaska. Oleg Deripaska, another name that we should know. He's one of 2 or 3 oligarchs closest to Vladimir Putin. If we think of Russia as communist, what made it communist back in the time period of the Soviet Union? It was the control the state had over resources. It doesn't look quite like that today, but Vladimir Putin still controls Russia, every part of Russian resources, but now instead of doing it by the state, it's through oligarchs, Russian billionaires that answer directly and only to the Kremlin. Those of them that try to not answer to the Kremlin are usually found in British streets dead. Oleg Deripaska is one of the 2 or 3 closest to Vladimir Putin and tasked with implementing his strategy worldwide. One of the few oligarchs that Putin turns to on a regular basis. He is an oligarch, a billionaire, heading the world's largest provider of aluminium, also Rusal, the largest private energy company inside Russia, so he's a very powerful man. He's also got very close ties to the Russian mafia. In the mid-2000s, he entered into a business relationship with Paul Manafort. It's Oleg Deripaska that controlled Paul Manafort, had him sent to Ukraine to interfere with the election in Ukraine that brought about their revolution in 2014. So it really goes Vladimir Putin, Oleg Deripaska, Paul Manafort, Ukraine, and also Donald Trump's election. Putin doesn't work directly, he works through his agents, and Deripaska is one of his main agents, particularly when it comes to the Ukraine. In 2014, Deripaska filed a petition in a Cayman Islands court accusing Manafort and Gates, another person on Trump's campaign, of taking $19 million intended for investment, then failing to account for the funds or return them. So what he said is that Manafort and Gates are $19 million in debt to him. Manafort in debt Deripaska then worked on Russian interests in the Ukraine, and it's believed that some type of deal was struck that Paul Manafort would further Russian interests when required to. And then when Paul Manafort began to work with Trump's election campaign, an email was leaked where Paul Manafort wrote to Oleg Deripaska and offered to provide him in-depth personal briefings of each step of the US election campaign. So as far as information getting fed back to Vladimir Putin, it again went Paul Manafort, Oleg Deripaska, Putin. Knowing this, the Trump administration, not the Trump administration, but Congress had announced sanctions on Oleg Deripaska early this year. Something he's been fighting against ever since. On December 19, the Trump administration announced that it intends to lift sanctions against the business empire of Oleg Deripaska, one of Russia's most influential oligarchs. The decision, which had been postponed for months, was both politically and economically sensitive and drew criticism from some Democrats and foreign policy analysts that the administration was sending the wrong signal to Moscow about its conduct towards its neighbours and the United States. It was in April that Deripaska, 6 other oligarchs and 17 senior government officials these sanctions were placed on them for, quote, trying to subvert Western democracy. So they're directly tying Deripaska to the 2016 election. The reason, this is one of their sources, the reason you know Deripaska's name is that Paul Manafort used to work and lobby for him. And Deripaska was banned from travelling to the United States. So on December 19, who wins? King of the North or King of the South? Vladimir Putin, in both spheres of influence and sanctions. When we consider December 19, let's go back to 2016 and the election. So how many of you know how the Electoral College works? We know that to elect a US president, it isn't so simple. So what's required is that on November 9 in 2016, or November 7 or 8, depending on the year, the 2016 November 9, the American people went to the polls. And what comes out of that? If you picture 51 US states, I want to draw, if I can find room. Let's see how tall I can be. If you can picture candidate 1 for the presidency, candidate 2. Now, candidate 1 wins 40 states and the popular vote. Now, I'm not saying this is what happened in 2016. I'm just giving you a scenario so we can understand how their election works. Candidate 2 wins 11 states and loses the popular vote. Who wins? It depends. Because if you picture different US states, we'll draw a couple of random ones. These US states have different numbers of what they call electors. So let's say this has 33 and this has 9 and this has 21, just being random. So if this candidate wins the popular vote and 40 US states, but it could be winning the states with the fewest amount of electors. So it doesn't actually matter whether or not you win more states or the popular vote. What matters is which states you win. So we understand that it is actually possible for candidate 2 to win, depending on the number of states that he's won. What Donald Trump did was win the key states, the states with the most electors. So if this is Texas, and it is one of the most important states, if this is Texas, he won the vote in Texas. So now he has 33 electors. And then what you'll see them do on those election nights is there's a tally. And they start adding up how many electors you've got. And it It's the candidate that reaches 270 electors or above that then wins that election. So on November 9 of 2016, it was a race to see who could win 270 electors. Each one of these represents a person. There's 33 people, for example, I don't know the exact number, in Texas, who then become part of that 270 plus who vote on the next president of the United States. Is that clear or confusing? Their system is confusing. Why I bring that up? When did Donald Trump win the presidency of the United States? No. November 9, he wins the vote of the people. He wins the most number of electors. So let's say this is Donald Trump. Not saying that's his exact dynamic, but he's won his 270. Actually, that might be the electors that need to vote for him. I think I'm close. But he needs 270 electors to vote for him in a later election. So there's two steps to an election process in the United States. The first time all the people come together, and then it's the candidate that has the most electors at the end of that process that has won. But then those electors need to come together and vote on who becomes the next president of the United States. So it is again possible, let's give another dynamic, it's possible for candidate 2 to win the most number of electors, and then for those electors to come together and vote and decide, no, we want candidate number 1. So this November 9 election, he's won the most number of electors, but he isn't secure of the presidency. And it's never been known in history, as far as I'm aware, for the electors to vote against their states. In some states it's actually illegal, they have to vote with their states. But it would have been possible for those electors to come together and vote in Hillary Clinton. So when did Donald Trump win the presidency of the United States? If we make this 2016, there was 2 elections. The first one was November 9, and this was the people. Out of that, he won the most electors, even though he lost the popular vote. The second election is December 19. And this is the electors. This is when he really wins the presidency. After that, it's set in stone. So in 2016, it gives you 2 dates, 2 elections, 2 steps to winning the presidency of the United States. On December 19, quoting from the New York Times, the Electoral College has affirmed Donald Trump as the nation's 45th president, pushing him past the 270 vote threshold for election. So if we consider December 19, as we discussed this morning, we're looking at a period of war. It happens progressively. But if we're going to mark a day, we know this date here is November 9. And I would suggest that if we're looking at the Battle of Heraclea this year, we're looking at December 19. December 20, Vladimir Putin held his annual news conference. Once a year, he meets with the media, this time for 4 hours, their extended affairs. He chose December 20 to meet with the media as it was the anniversary of the founding of Lenin's secret police, the Cheka, on December 20 of 1917. It's nice that he's given, he must miss the secret police. December 20, Putin of Russia in this 4-hour conference hailed the decision by President Trump to withdraw the United States forces from Syria, calling it correct, because American troops were not needed in Syria. His response came during his annual news conference, the marathon 4-hour affair, during which he suggested several times that Mr. Trump was being thwarted by those who did not accept his victory as president. Mr. Putin reiterated the Kremlin position that American forces have no legal right to be in Syria, in that they were neither invited by Damascus, as the Russian forces were, nor authorized by the United Nations Security Council. The American decision to withdraw represents at least a tactical victory for Putin, who intervened in Syria in 2015 with a primary goal of re-establishing Russia as a power to be reckoned with in the Middle East. For now, it is really good news for Putin, said Konstantin Egert, a political commentator on the independent Russian TV station, a word I can't pronounce. Putin's main goal from day one of his intervention was to establish himself as the global authority to prevent US regime change. In this, he has succeeded. For now, however, Mr. Putin savoured the moment, using the news conference to hit on a favourite theme, that Russia is a pocket of stability compared with the disintegrating West. He said the Anglo-Saxon world was undergoing tectonic shifts with both the election of Mr. Trump and the vote by Britons to leave the EU. He says, quoting Putin, "Trump has won, which is an obvious fact, but not everyone is willing to accept this victory. They have been doing their utmost to delegitimise their president." He says Britain was facing similar problems with the Brexit referendum. He said, quote, "No one recognises the results and the democratic procedures have been unravelling." Does he care about the democratic procedures? Russia has been accused of manipulating both the 2016 American election and the Brexit referendum through social media. This is where we talk about aggregate IQ and Cambridge Analytica, and possibly through illicit campaign cash. But Mr. Putin made the statements without any apparent irony, nor did he refer to the accusations. So, who wins out of this engagement? The King of the South. In 1989, did we see the King of the North? Did we see the United States turn up on the day? Never saw them. Why? Because the work had been done previously. I want to bring our attention to one other December 19, and this is where the study this morning, where we saw how we can overlay history and also take in specific dates. And that is December 19, 1941. Since Trump was elected in 2016, there have been key people, particularly mainly US generals, in the White House holding him back. In whatever way they do that, whether it's persuasion, whether that's hiding his documents so he can't sign them, there's been people restraining Donald Trump. Pretty much the last man standing was Jim Mattis. And the same day that Donald Trump announced he's pulling troops out of Syria and Afghanistan and easing sanctions, removing sanctions on Deripaska, Jim Mattis resigned. In that resignation letter, he said, "One core belief I have always held is that our strength as a nation is inextricably linked to the strength of our unique and comprehensive system of alliances and partnerships. While the US remains the indispensable nation in the free world, we cannot protect our interests or serve that role effectively without maintaining strong alliances and showing respect to those allies. Faced with a president who made enemies of our allies and allies of our enemies, no one has arguably been happier with the Trump presidency than Russian President Vladimir Putin." Mattis decided to walk away. Sorry, that last little bit was not a quote. But Mattis essentially said that in a much more diplomatic way, that Donald Trump has not correctly identified his allies or his enemies. If you were to think of the generals and the key men that have held Donald Trump back, Rex Tillerson, John Kelly, James Madison, one by one they've been shed this past year. And one by one those restraints on Donald Trump have been removed. Another quote, "The simple fact of Trump's presidency is now this: all rails have been removed from the proverbial road. The men and women expected to mediate and mitigate some of Trump's wilder ideas and statements are now almost to a person gone, driven off by a president whose vision of the country and the world is both highly erratic and deeply held. And almost to a person, those advisers have been replaced by others who have risen up in Trump's reckoning by telling him what he wants to hear. Mattis's departure is the death knell of the idea that Trump could and possibly would to adhere to any sort of normal order during his term as president. This is a president who has driven away the very people who he and the country trusted with guiding him as a political leader in these difficult times. Now there is only Trump and those willing to enable him. Why Trump clashed with these generals in this previous time period is that they held different views to him. They had strong reasons why US troops needed to stay in Syria, why ISIS wasn't defeated, why they were needed in Afghanistan, with also interacting with Iran and NATO. Men who've really had these ideas by serving on the ground over years and decades. And July 19, this was it for Mattis, pretty much the last man standing. Why I want to bring in July 19, 1941, on this day in a major shake-up of the military high command, Adolf Hitler assumed the position of commander-in-chief of the German army. What he did was overrule his generals and took control of the army. Hitler refused to take the advice of his generals, who were telling him that he was undertaking this war incorrectly, that his decisions were wrong. So instead of listening to his generals, he overruled them. He began removing officers from their command, or not replacing those who were ill, or replacing them with people who would tell him what he wanted to hear. In the biggest shake-up of all, he declared himself commander-in-chief of the army. He would train it in a national socialist way, that's in quotes. That is, by personal fiat. He would compose the strategies and the officers and generals would do as he said. He's no longer taking advice from his generals. And I would suggest that we can tie in the December 1941. Donald Trump is no longer restrained by his generals. So when we consider the events of Heraclea, we now have three witnesses, 1989, 2016 and 2018, all battles in our history. And they're not just described as, I'm not describing them as battles. History isn't just describing them as battles. Daniel 11 verse 40 is describing them as battles. So these are what tells us, these are what should teach us of what warfare looks like in our time. This is the same process, the same things that we should expect to see, not against the West in 2019, but war on the Eastern Front, what then turns against the East. It's information war, and it's also subverting from the inside. And we should see also these two parts come into play, both spheres of influence and sanctions. I'd also, if you are counting, there's 40 days between November 9 and December 19. 27 days from October 13 take you to November 9. 40 days from November 9 to December 19. If you would kneel with me, we'll close in prayer. Dear Father in heaven, thank you, Lord, for our blessings. Thank you, Lord, that we have not only past history, but current history, Lord, that can teach us the future. Father, I pray that you will make these things clear in our minds, that when the time comes, Lord, and we're to identify what is happening in around us, we will know the truth from the error, and we'll be able to correctly identify our waymarks. I pray, Lord, for our continued studies. There is much still, Lord, to be studied, to be both discovered and also to be made more solid as a movement and also in our own personal lives. I pray that you'll bless every head bowed as we endeavour to do this and become prepared, Lord, not just to be so sure of ourselves of where we are, but to be able to warn and reach those around us. Thank you, Father, that you do not leave us in these tumultuous times, Lord, that what is happening on an unprecedented scale. Father, the shutdown of the US government, so much that has just begun to look normal to us, Lord, but it is not normal. Thank you that you do not leave us wondering what is going on, Father, but you make it clear that we can understand not only what is going on, but that it's also prophetic, Father, and where it is leading. I pray that you will bless the remaining Sabbath hours and our times we fellowship and discuss. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.